Oh, Edmund, so you've got in too, she cried. I've been having lunch with dear Mr. Tumnus, and the White Witch has done nothing to him, so he thinks she can't have found out. The White Witch? Said Edmund. Who's she? She is a perfectly terrible person, said Lucy. She calls herself the Queen of Narnia, though all the fauns and nymphs and animals hate her. She can turn people into stone, and she has put an enchantment on Narnia so that it is always winter. I just want to say there, always winter but never Christmas. That's what comes in the main book. When he heard that the lady he had made friends with was a dangerous witch, Edmund felt very uncomfortable, but he still wanted to taste that Turkish delight more than anything else. By this time they had walked a good way. Then suddenly they felt coats around them instead of branches, and next moment they were both standing outside the wardrobe in the empty room. Said Lucy, let's find the others. What a lot there is to tell them. But when Lucy told Peter and Susan that Edmund had been in Narnia too, he suddenly decided to do a very spiteful thing and said, "Oh yes, Lucy and I have been playing, pretending that her story about a country in the wardrobe is true. Just for fun, of course. There's nothing there, really." Lucy gave Edmund one look and rushed out of the room. Now, sightseers often came to see the professor's interesting old house. The children usually kept out of their way. But one morning, a few days later, they just couldn't seem to avoid them. "Let's hide in the wardrobe room," said Susan. But once inside, they heard voices at the door. "Quick," said Peter, and flung open the wardrobe. They all bundled inside and suddenly found themselves surrounded by snow-covered trees. "Why, we've got into Lucy's wood," said Peter. He turned at once to her. "I'm sorry for not believing you, Lou." "That's all right," she said. "Let's go and see Mr. Tumnus. He's the nice faun I told you about." So, each borrowing a fur coat, they set off. But at the faun's cave, a terrible surprise awaited them. The door had been wrenched off its hinges, and everything lay smashed on the floor. Nailed to the carpet was a note. It said that Mr. Tumnus had been arrested for high treason against the Queen of Narnia. "She isn't a real queen at all," cried Lucy. "She's a horrible witch, and all the wood people hate her. Oh, we must try to rescue him." Look, can you see there the devastation of Mr. Tumnus's little cave house with all his furniture thrown out into the snow? I think maybe the children's expressions should be looking a little bit more sad or shocked, especially Lucy's. I guess Susan has got a comforting hand on her shoulder. Here's Pauline Bain's illustration of Mr. Tumnus's wrecked cave. "Look," cried Susan suddenly. "There's something among the trees." The whiskered, furry face of a beaver peeked out at them. "Are you the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve?" it whispered. And, to show it was a friend, the beaver took out the handkerchief Lucy had given Mr. Tumnus. Do you remember when he was crying? "Poor fellow. He said that if anything happened to him, I must meet you here," the beaver told them. Then it added, "Aslan is on the move." Now, none of the children knew who Aslan was, but at his name each of them felt something jump inside. Peter felt brave and adventurous. Susan felt as if beautiful music had just floated by. And Lucy got the feeling you have at the beginning of summer. But Edmund felt only mysterious horror. "And what about Mr. Tumnus?" said Lucy. "Where is he?" "Shh, not here," said the beaver. "I must bring you where we can have a real talk." So they all hurried along behind their new friend, and presently came to a large frozen river. A dam had been built across it, and on top of the dam was a little house. But Edmund also noticed two small hills in the distance, and was sure that the White Witch's palace lay between them. A lovely illustration. Can you see that snowy Narnia scene? And then if you look closer, you can see the four children and the beaver balancing carefully across that beaver's dam that leads to his little house he's made there. Can you see? I think it's kind of made of twigs and sticks, and it looks really cosy and homely with the smoke coming out. But by this point, the children are really cold and hungry, and this kind of domestic warmth and food promised by that is really, really appealing. I think the illustrator's kind of showing that by the kind of warm glow coming out onto the cold snow. This is all frozen water here. This is all icy. And there's a funny bit where the children notice the beaver's got this very modest expression on his face when they start complimenting him about what a lovely dam, because he's made it himself and he's rather proud. I just want to show you the original Pauline Baines illustrations for this part, because reading is all about getting pictures in your mind like a film scrolling through. And I think the C.S. Lewis worked very closely with Pauline Baines when he was writing his original books. So I think he didn't like the way she drew people, but he completely agreed with her animals. So here's the Mr. Beaver beckoning them from behind a tree. And then look, there they are in their long fur coats arriving at the beaver's house. I wonder if that washing would get dry sitting out there on the line. It looks a bit like when you were doing in year 4 Shackleton living on the ice, when they had to make their camp after the Endeavour sank. Okay, and then look, there's Mrs. Beaver with her sewing machine inside. Love how Pauline Baines has done all those tiny little details. Old-fashioned sewing machine. And then look at that lovely meal in that lovely warm, cosy place with all the food hanging from the ceiling, the meat. And then see these things that look like tennis rackets? They're snowshoes. So they would go underneath the beaver's feet. They'd strap them on so they could walk on the heavy, deep snow without sinking in. And then there's their little bunks with their place for their shoes underneath. All the sort of practical outdoor things they need for their lives tucked in that little cosy place. So can you see which children are whom? That must be Susan, Lucy and Peter and Edmund. And in the original they describe Peter's helped Mr. Beaver to go and catch some fish, and they're absolutely ravenously hungry. And then Mrs. Beaver says, right, can you drain this and put that on the table and get the marmalade roll in the oven? And it's all that sense of getting a meal on the table that's just so satisfying to read about. Mrs. Beaver was waiting for them, and in no time the children were seated round a table eating freshly caught fish and boiled potatoes with plenty of butter. And now, said Mr. Beaver, when they had all finished eating, we can get to business. First of all, Mr. Tumnus has been taken to the Queen's house and turned into stone. There's nothing any of us could do on our own, but now that Aslan is on the move. Oh yes, tell us about Aslan, they all cried. Aslan? Why, he's the king, said Mr. Beaver. He's the great lion and the lord of the whole wood. But not often here, you understand. Now, word has reached us that he's come back to Narnia, and you are to meet him tomorrow at the stone table. He'll settle the White Witch all right, for there's an old saying that when Aslan returns and 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve sit in the 4 thrones at Cair Paravel, that it'll be the end not only of the White Witch's eternal winter, but of her life. That's why she wants to get you all to her castle, where she can turn you to stone and so rule Narnia forever. There was a moment of silence after Mr. Beaver's last remark. Then Lucy suddenly said, "Where's Edmund?" Everyone rushed to the door and looked out. Snow was falling thickly and steadily, but Edmund was nowhere to be seen. I have to just read you the searching for Edmund scene from the original book. There was a dreadful pause, and then everyone began asking, "Who saw him last? How long has he been missing? Is he outside?" And then all rushed to the door and looked out. The snow was falling thickly and steadily. The green ice of the pool, that's the beaver's pool, had vanished under a thick white blanket, and from where the little house stood in the centre of the dam, you could hardly see either bank. Out they went, plunging well over their ankles into the soft new snow, and went round the house in every direction. "Edmund! Edmund!" they called till they were hoarse, but the silently falling snow seemed to muffle their voices, and there was not even an echo in answer. "He will have gone to the White Witch," said Mr. Beaver grimly. "I thought he looked as if he was under her enchantment. We must go to the stone table at once before the witch catches us. There's not a moment to lose. Look, there is Edmund. He has slipped out into the snow. So in the original book, Peter wants to split into search parties and desperately look for Edmund. But the beaver, he knows that he's gone to betray them to the White Witch. And he says, "What do you mean there's no use looking for him?" "The reason there's no use looking," said Mr. Beaver, "is that we know already where he's gone." Everyone stared in amazement. "Don't you understand?" said the beaver. "He's gone to her, to the White Witch. He has betrayed us all." Oh, surely. Oh, really," said Susan. "He can't have done that." "Can't he?" said Mr. Beaver, looking very hard at the three children. And everything they wanted to say died on their lips, for each felt suddenly quite certain inside that this was exactly what Edmund had done. "He would have gone to the White Witch," said Mr. Beaver grimly. "I thought he looked as if he were under her enchantment. We must go to the stone table at once, before the witch catches us. There's not a moment to lose." Look at the perspective on that illustration. You've got Edmund right tiny down here in front of these huge gates and the very intimidating looking White Witch's castle. And then here, can you see that wolf just ahead of him? Edmund was indeed making his way to the White Witch's house. After a long and bitterly cold walk through snowy, icy drifts, he came to it at last. The iron gates stood wide open, and he made his way cautiously through a courtyard filled with stone statues. There's a funny bit in the book where he stands for ages watching this lion, thinking it's about to pounce on a little creature next to it, and then he suddenly realises that the snow is settling on the lion's back and it must be a stone lion. And then he's got a little bit of charcoal pencil in his pocket, and he goes and he draws spectacles or glasses and I think a moustache on the lion. And so he kind of got over his terror, and so now he thinks that the wolf here on the threshold, on the doorstep, is also stone. And he goes to step over it, but actually it snarls. Across the threshold lay a great wolf. It rose, the hair bristling along its back, and growled, "Who's there?" "If you please, sir," said Edmund, trembling, "I'm the boy that Her Majesty met in the wood the other day." The wolf vanished into the house, and Edmund followed. "How dare you come alone?" cried the witch in a terrible voice. "I've brought the others quite close, Your Majesty," stuttered Edmund. "They're with Mr. and Mrs. Beaver." A cruel smile came over the witch's face, until Edmund told her all that he had heard before leaving the beaver's house. "What? Aslan?" cried the queen, and clapped her hands. Instantly the dwarf appeared. "Make ready our sledge," she ordered. And in the book she says, "and use the harness without bells." Look, all this talk of Aslan. Do you reckon that's him on the front cover? We've got the lion, Aslan. Remember that feeling that all the different children had when they heard his name first? So the prophecy is that when Adam's flesh and Adam's bone sit at Cair Paravel enthroned, the evil days will be over and done. So we've got the lion, got the witch. Oh, I think that might be Cair Paravel in the distance there, the palace. The lion, the witch, and we've got the wardrobe. Obviously, that they came into Narnia through. Right. Looks like Edmund's not going to get his Turkish delight after all. Can you see that without the shine? Look, can you see all these creatures around who've been turned to stone? Can't see Mr. Tumnus there. I can see a unicorn. And actually that might be Mr. Tumnus, or that might be a centaur, because it looks like he's got the front legs of a horse. So, and it looks like he was fighting the witch when he got turned to stone, because centaurs are very warlike. So if this was a film, it will be cutting back to the scene with the beavers and the children desperately trying to flee from the house. So Mrs. Beaver here, she doesn't have any sense of urgency. She's made them all up little packs to carry, and she's saying to Mr. Beaver, I don't suppose we can take our sewing machine, can we? I can't abide the thought of the witch fiddling with it. Meanwhile, we all know that the witch has sent the wolf, and he's Morgan, the chief wolf, sent them all to find out the beaver's dam and to kill whatever they find there. So we've got this huge sense of urgency, and Peter, Susan and Lucy are all saying we must get going, while Mrs. Beaver is saying, oh, we'll just cut a slice of we'll just cut some bread and let's take the bread knife with us. And look, you can see them putting their snowshoes on there, ready to escape. In the meantime, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver were leading the children along the riverbank. At last, when Lucy was so tired that she was almost asleep on her feet, they came to a snug little hole where they could spend the night. They awoke to the sound of jingling bells. So is it her? Is it the witch? Remember, she used the harness without bells, so no, it's someone completely different, someone much happier. Mr. Beaver was out of the cave like a flash. Then they heard him shout, It's all right! Come out, everyone! It isn't her! They all scrambled up the steep bank. There on his sledge sat Father Christmas, big and glad. I've come at last, he said. The White Witch has kept me out for a long time, but her magic is weakening. Aslan is on the move. And now for your presents, he smiled. Mrs. Beaver, a new sewing machine is waiting for you at home. And Mr. Beaver, you will find your new dam quite finished. The kind creatures were so pleased they could hardly speak. Then Father Christmas gave Peter a magnificent sword and shield. For Susan, there was a bow and a quiver of arrows and a little horn. Last of all, he gave Lucy a clear crystal bottle and a small dagger. In this bottle, he said, there is a cordial made of the juice of the fire flowers. If you or any of your friends is hurt, a few drops of this will restore them. Then he cried out, Merry Christmas! Long live the true king! And drove out of sight. It's time we too were moving on, said Mr. Beaver. So I love this illustration. Did you notice how they described Father Christmas as big and glad? And here he looks very comforting. In the book, they also he whisks out a tray of tea, and they all have a morning cup of tea, which I would find very comforting. So here, Lucy's gift was a horn, and it's a magic horn, which whenever you blow it, help of some sort will come to you. And then Peter, in the other book, while he and Mr. Beaver drink their tea, they pull his sword out of its scabbard, that's the case, and they're examining the blade. I think that's such a realistic touch. I think that's what any person might do who's been given a sword. And then Lucy here, her present, do you remember it was the little cordial? Cordial is like intense, you know, like orange squash or ribena that you haven't diluted. It's that kind of very intense juice. And it's, you know, if you put water in it, then it makes it into a normal drink. So the cordial is the kind of very concentrated juice. And it's, did you see, it was made of the fire flowers from beyond the sun. And in the later book, The Dawn Treader, they actually see birds flying out from the dawn holding these fire flower berries in their beaks. So a lovely scene there in the middle of all their struggle and wet snow and suffering. Okay, we're going to whiz speedily through our new words section this week. These are the ones that I thought that you might have spotted, that might have been new for you. Please correct me in the comments if you knew all these already and actually like different words. But if we start with threshold, okay, threshold. Do you remember this picture here of Edmund on the threshold of the witch's castle? So threshold, I said it meant like doorstep. So threshold is the kind of the doorway, the entrance. You can use it metaphorically. You can say you're standing at the threshold of a new adventure or the threshold of the next part of your life. So it's all about, you often kind of pause on the threshold. You just kind of stand there, just waiting a moment before you walk forwards through that door and enter into the new adventure ahead of you. Okay, domestic is anything to do with your home, anything to do with your home. So Do you remember we had that scene in the book where it's all snowy and cold and dark outside, and then you've got this domestic scene with the light shining out from the house? So in the old days, they had domestic servants who worked in houses. Domestic is anything that's the opposite of like adventures and dramas outside. It's all to do with inside the house, domestic. So often you say domestic bliss if it's all cosy and warm and you've got delicious food and it's all neat and tidy and beautifully arranged. Domestic. Okay, modest. Modest means the opposite of showing off. So if you've got like a winner's podium here, you've got the people who came second and third going, yay, look at my muscles, I'm cheering. Then the person who's won, they might just be looking down quietly and maybe they were slightly embarrassed and they're not showing off. So modest is the opposite of showing off. So when the beaver had a modest expression on his face, he was kind of pleased that they were noticing that he'd made a beautiful dam and house, but he wasn't showing off about it. Okay, cautiously, lovely adverb there. It said Edmund stepped cautiously over the threshold. Cautiously, he stepped over the wolf. So I would step cautiously if I was creeping about in the night in the house and I didn't want to wake anybody up. I didn't want to tread on a piece of Lego. You can think in that Michael Rosen poem, the chocolate cake one, where he goes downstairs in the night to have a slice of cake. He's walking cautiously over the squeaky floorboard, kind of on tiptoes, being careful. Cautiously is a bit like carefully. We're running out of time, so I'll just say that courtyard is like a garden with a wall or a fence around it. So here's the house or the palace, and then here's the courtyard outside. It's the kind of garden yard bit. And snarls, so the wolf snarls when Edmund tries to step over it. It's like when a dog is going to bite you. It's a cruel verb. It's a really harsh, snarled, get off, snarled the man, snarled. Okay, it's quiz time. So super speedily in your book, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. First question is, what possession was it that the Mrs. Beaver really wanted to bring with her that she couldn't pack, and that she was really bothered that the White Witch might fiddle with? Okay, question 2. Question 2, what did Edmund do when he saw that lion that was stone in the courtyard? What did he do when he realised it was just a stone lion and he was all relieved? I think he thought it was Aslan, and he took something out of his pocket and did something to it. Okay, question 3. Can you remember the reactions when they first heard the name Aslan? Peter felt brave and adventurous, and Susan felt like she'd heard some beautiful music, and Edmund felt this feeling of horror. Can you remember what Lucy felt? That is a really tough recall question. Last question. When Father Christmas says, "Long live the true King of Narnia," who is he talking about? I'll give you a clue. It's not Aslan. Aslan is coming to put things to right. But who do you think he might be talking about? That's a really tough inference question. That last one was question 4. And then the last one, question 5. Can you remember any of the gifts that he gave the children? Okay, answers time. Number 1, the sewing machine was Mrs. Beaver's treasured possession. Number 2 was that Edmund took a charcoal pencil out of his pocket and he drew glasses and a moustache on the lion. Number 3, it was Lucy. She remembered that feeling you get at the beginning of summer when it was Aslan's name mentioned. In the book it says the beginning of the summer holidays. C.S. Lewis went to a horrible boarding school, so he had the most lovely feeling at the beginning of the summer holidays. You might be getting that at the beginning of the Easter holidays tomorrow. And no school, no work. And then question 4, I'm not going to tell you who the true King of Narnia is going to be, because I want you to put that in the comments. I want to know if you can figure that out. And then the last one, you could have had any of these. Peter got given the sword and I think shield. Susan got the horn that you blow. It's like and a bow and arrows. And then Lucy got given this special cordial that heals people. Okay, it was lovely to have your company. I hope you have a really good Easter break and see you in 2 weeks. And comment below the answer to question 4. Who is the true King of Narnia, do you think? Okay.